Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Rod, for your introduction. It's good to be back at Prosafe this year, and I would like to thank Marcus Evans for continuing to organize this forum. Today, I would like to talk about process safety during a pandemic, our observations and lessons learned. Just a quick outline. I'll start off with a core value share, which is a ritual in DuPont Sustainable Solutions, or DSS for short. I will talk about DuPont Sustainable Solutions, who we are, and what we do. I'll then share with you our observations across our operations and also our client sites, and the impact on process safety performance. We will then cover some lessons learned, and we will have some time for questions at the end of this presentation. Before our meetings or discussions at DSS, we will start with the core value share, which helps us align to our four core values of safety and health, environmental stewardship, respect for people, and highest ethical behavior. Here is my core value share. Were we prepared for this global pandemic? Let's have a look at this table, which lists all the major viruses identified in the last 50 years. We have the Marburg virus in 1967, Ebola in 76, the Hendra virus in 94, which incidentally is about a kilometer away from where I live in Brisbane, the H5N1 bird flu virus in 97, Nipah in 98, SARS in 2002, H1N1 in 2009, MERS in 2012, and H7N9 bird flu virus in 2013. If you sort this table from its current chronological order to the number of cases or the number of deaths or the total number of countries impacted, you get the H1N1 virus of 2009 come right at the top of the list. The H1N1 virus of 2009 is related to the H1N1 virus in 1918, which led to the Spanish flu. Let's add another two viruses which led to the global pandemics in the last 100 years. And when you do this, the H1N1 virus of 1918 gains top spot with an estimated 50 million deaths globally within 20 months. The 2020 new coronavirus comes second with 2.6 million deaths globally, or 5% of the Spanish flu, after 12 months of the pandemic declaration. This table lists 3 pandemic exercises conducted by the Johns Hopkins University and the CDC in the last 10 years. Dark Winter was an exercise done in 2001, and it was a smallpox pandemic with 1 million deaths projected after 8 weeks. Cladex in 2018 had a projected 150 million deaths in 20 months, while Event 201, held in October 2019, had 65 million deaths projected in 20 months. All these exercises came to the same conclusion. The global community's preparedness for epidemics and pandemics was very weak and were vulnerable in nearly all the metrics measured, such as security risk, healthcare capacity, travel restrictions, immunization, socioeconomic resilience, etc., etc. 5 months after Event 201's pandemic exercise, our time to get ahead and proactively implement these recommendations and improvements ran out. So here's a question, or here's something for us to think about. Did we miss the warning signs prior to the current pandemic? Or did we choose to miss the warning signs for the current pandemic? Who is DuPont Sustainable Solutions? We are a diverse team of consultants who have hands-on experience working in and leading complex operations across many industries. There are about 900 of us based in the Americas, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Asia Pacific regions. Our operational knowledge and experience comes not only from heritage DuPont sites, but from our clients as well. We help our clients protect their people and improve their operations. So let's start off with what we know and have felt in the last 12 months. The following are our observations at our sites, but also from our client sites across the world. All of industry was impacted by the pandemic. Chemical manufacturing, metals mining, oil and gas, power generation, food processing, transportation, list goes on. No one was spared. The significant financial impact and prospects of a deep recession in 2020 had caused many companies to focus on cost reduction. Some examples of organizations taking cost reduction decisions are unpaid time off programs, contract renegotiations, inventory reduction, and optimizing or shutting down operations. The following is a criteria that organizations typically use in making these cost reduction decisions, such as cash preservation or redirecting investments or asset availability or health and safety, etc. However, as the pandemic ravaged through our population and shook the financial systems, some companies went into survival mode early and some went into insolvency. As in these situations, if something doesn't fit into the narrative of getting the product out of the door or completing all deliverables to get paid, it gets pushed back or relegated. Now, there were no exceptions, even for highly hazardous operations, where maintaining asset integrity and maintaining operating discipline, these became secondary considerations. The thinking and the mood was, everyone understood these were short-term measures, and fingers crossed, it'll be right by 2021. Unfortunately, cost reduction initiatives, which often take little account of risk elements, can potentially compromise mid and long-term operational performance. Many leadership teams made poor, uninformed decisions and misunderstood the net savings they obtained. For example, a company which made redundant their highly experienced operating staff discovered later these were the only people remaining from when the facility started up who had the deep knowledge and capability to operate these facilities effectively. Workforce mobility was significantly impacted where businesses reacted in a number of ways, from the travel bans to the lockdowns and social distancing restrictions. Some did this better than others. Companies faced tremendous challenges in reducing technical and supervisory presence at the front line, which saw an increase in remote teleconferencing support. I believe many of us here who have experienced the lockdowns have become familiar with the daily 10-second commute from the breakfast table to the home office. For many operating sites, especially remote locations, shift rosters had to be altered, even frozen, to meet different travel restrictions across state and international borders. Sites had to relearn quickly on how to operate with minimum staffing and external support for extended periods. Like our conference today, almost all external specialist support had to be provided virtually, owing to the long quarantine requirements and tough border restrictions. Another area which you can immediately see and feel as a direct result of the pandemic is the disruption in global supply chains. You probably witnessed this for yourself in the early days of the pandemic. We could not get our hands on P2 masks, hand sanitizers, even toilet paper, and these were consumables essential to protect ourselves. For industry, you started seeing delays in obtaining parts and consumables as ports and warehouses were getting choked. The marketplace became quite brutal, where long-term relationships were being tested and goodwill sometimes evaporated. Sourcing simple parts or critical consumables became an uphill battle every day for the purchasing and contracts teams. Some established suppliers and vendors went out of business, and the purchasing folks had to very quickly source alternative goods and services. And sometimes these came at spot premium prices. So when you factor in cost reduction into an already brittle and stressed supply chain, then you can start to see the causation factors for serious incidents. These start to line up. So let's go a bit deeper into the impact of process safety performance for highly hazardous operating sites. Now we'll look into these three areas, which are cost reduction, reduced workforce mobility, and supply chain disruptions. The biggest issue we've observed has to do with organizational culture. A major disruption like a pandemic is absolutely the time when the leaders in the organization should want to listen to diverse views on safe and reliable operations of their facilities and sites. Where the existing culture is opaque or punitive to bearers of bad news, folks who want to protect their jobs will not be willing to inform of any major process safety deviations or concerns. They want to keep their jobs, got families to feed. Now, this is a common theme from incident investigation reports, especially where the ingredients of the catastrophic failure or the catastrophic event was seen and felt long before these events occurred. A client once told me, when I was in shift operations, we had a KPI to tell us how well our site was doing. When the quality of biscuits and tea in our lunchroom, when these start to diminish or even disappear, we know we were headed towards tough times. And I'm sure some of you have similar KPIs or measures. A typical area for cost reduction at highly hazardous operating sites are training, new hires, capital projects, and plant maintenance. The training typically for personnel gets postponed or gets its scope reduced or even canceled. Some training programs which require an instructor-led training approach, now these may be scaled back to a self-paced e-learning module. So I'm sometimes asked if you can squeeze in a 5-day process hazard analysis training workshop into about a 1.5 days training. And my answer is yes, you can do this if the desired outcome is to tick a box. When critical training for operating teams become a nice to have, we can potentially run into serious knowledge and skills gap. While a hiring freeze makes sense for growth or non-essential roles, if you delay a process safety critical role replacement, now that can put your site into a vulnerable position. Some sites, what they've done is to redistribute the workload and responsibilities across different roles already existing on site. Now, while this can be okay for 3 or 4 months, it becomes untenable and things start to unravel after those 3 or 4 months. Another area which goes through the cost microscope are capital projects and plant maintenance work. Now, typically, these are expensive programs, especially turnarounds and outages. Organizations want to know if they can defer this and reduce the scope of planned capital and maintenance work, and they want to know it yesterday. They want this list yesterday. Because this determination is time sensitive, what many organizations end up doing is using cost as the only criteria in the decision-making process. We've seen with some of our clients that making properly considered good risk-based decisions for CapEx or plant maintenance deferral doesn't require too much time, as long as you have the right information available and the right people to discuss, evaluate, and decide. In some organizations, there was tremendous pressure which came from the executive leadership team to the site managers, where the lines of intolerable and unacceptable risks, these started becoming blurred, leading to inconsistent decisions and messages to the workforce. When these management systems and processes start to unravel, then the deficiencies and gaps become more prevalent, leading to serious near misses and, in some cases, catastrophic failure. Please note, when process hazard analysis or operational risk assessments are conducted for sites, that global disruptions such as the pandemic are almost never considered. The management systems, processes, and safeguards within the studied system or site is always considered as available and it's always working. Unless you conduct a business continuity planning exercise and consciously consider these disruption factors to your entire operations, the impact is only realized too late after the fact. We've seen many organizations which had not developed and implemented good business continuity management plans, resulting in reactive and chaotic decisions in the early days of the pandemic. This chaotic period was further exacerbated by a reduced headcount and reduced in-house technical capability. Without supervisors and technical support present in the field to assist the front lines, teams which face abnormal operating modes can start making mistakes or take unacceptable shortcuts. When you couple this with a fatigued and mentally stressed workforce who've been through extended rosters and short rest days, then you start witnessing lower operating disciplines such as unmanaged changes or optionality in critical operating procedures. Unless promptly corrected, we all know where all this can lead to. Supply chain disruptions can introduce time and cost pressures, and time-consuming MOC processes can be an obstacle. For example, we had a client who faced this scenario where operations required urgent maintenance replacement of a safety critical element. The quickest option was to obtain a part from a new untested supplier. The pressure to procure and install and operate the replacement part can be tremendous, but so too was the pressure to ensure compliance to the established standards and codes. So which side won the argument? When the choice is expediency over compliance, then we'll be probably reading the impact out of this in an incident investigation report. For our client, though, they made the right choice by following their management of change and quality assurance processes. It doesn't have to be down the wire for these decisions to be made by the folks on site. Conceptually, the systems and processes ask the following questions, such as, is this a like-for-like replacement? How do we know? Who has checked that this replacement is fit for purpose? Will it be safe to operate once it is implemented? Have we obtained the replacement parts from recognized and reliable sources? How do we know? For these questions to be asked, we need the folks at the site who have a good understanding of the intent of the management systems, standards, and processes. Another process safety impact is where scarcity of parts and services can mean that temporary modifications or repairs now have to be temporary a bit longer. Until the site conducts a re-evaluation on all active temporary modifications, fixes, repairs, some temporary patches or band-aids may start to break down. Those band-aids can fail and potentially cause process safety events. We observed some sites which have implemented this review only after a serious near miss or a loss of containment when that had happened. So hindsight is great, and I'd like to share some good lessons learned from some of our sites and also client sites. Lesson number 1, effectively implemented business continuity management plans greatly reduce the impact of serious disruptions. Business operations, which had minimized the impact of the pandemic disruptions, all had business continuity plans developed implemented, and practiced within their workforce. Our operating sites in Asia, including our consulting team, had the pandemic operating plan activated very early last year, as we had previously experienced SARS and swine flu. But just as emergency response plans, business continuity plans can only be effective if it's properly implemented, tested, and drilled across the organization. Many organizations which had business continuity plans didn't have the level of detail required to guide the operations teams. It was good to know what to do when your IT servers fail. How does a site deal with the inability to discharge wastewater or when it's a prolonged strike action? So for highly hazardous facilities and operations, if you don't have a business continuity plan, develop one. If you have developed one and it's sitting in your library, dust it off and implement it. If you have implemented it, practice, drill, review, and improve your business continuity plan. Now, it does take some time and resources, but like insurance, if you only realize that the true value of your current business plan, if it goes sideways. Lesson number 2, the implicit reliance on people as critical safeguards to prevent and mitigate major accident events was reaffirmed. Even with automated, inherently safer design processes and facilities, you need your well-motivated and capable workforce to maintain safe and reliable operations. Sites which undertook a review of the safety critical elements or barriers to understand their current risk profile benefited with not only verifying which barriers functioned as designed, but in some occasions found previously unknown and significant gaps. This means that they were potentially operating in the material risk zones. In other words, the red zone. By conducting these barrier health verification activities, operational leaders were able to provide resources to where it is most needed and to also make good risk-based decisions. Now, for all this to happen, you need your most capable people to review the current risk, implement improvements, and maintain a strong operating discipline. Lesson number 3, sites which engage their workforce early with clear communications of the disruptions and were unambiguous in protecting their workforce perform better. These sites increase line management interactions with their workforce, such as daily check-ins or regular town halls, where they stressed on keeping focus on safe and reliable operations at their facilities. At highly hazardous operations, leadership teams stressed on leader standard work or worker critical tasks and conducted regular verification interactions. Training was optimized for frontline leaders to improve their skills in problem solving, data analysis, and root cause analysis. Refresher training was also given to re-emphasize concept of process safety across the different elements of risk governance, risk recognition, risk management, and continuous improvement. So to summarize, leadership teams who place their people's well-being front and center and demonstrated this as part of the workplace culture kept their best performers and have managed this pandemic better than their peers. Lesson number 4. Organizations which have excessive process safety debts may have to repay it in a form of a catastrophic failure or incident. Process safety debts are incurred by organizations when maintenance is deferred or postponed for a process safety safeguard or barriers. Now, these barriers can be devices, assets, personnel, management system, or processes. An example of a deferral can be a deferral of an annual critical function test for a safety critical device. Another example is a delay in the hiring of replacement process safety critical roles, or extending the period for a bypass installed on a faulty safety critical device. Many organizations would conduct a risk assessment to provide assurances that These deferrals, delays, and extensions were well managed, and the risk arising is tolerable. A watch point here is process safety debt works much like sleep deficit. It accumulates to a point where it tips over and starts to self-correct the imbalance. So my advice is to monitor all the deferrals and extensions, especially poor legacy decisions, before these start to bubble up to the surface and give us an unwanted surprise. We're still not out of the woods yet, but in a post-pandemic world, my view is that we will need to look at these following areas. Number one, we will need to maintain the critical capabilities of our operating personnel and to quickly and effectively respond to potential global disruptions. Economically, as we are interconnected and dependent on each other, future global disruptions impacting our process safety performance, these are inevitable. Number two, business continuity plans are exactly that, plans which help keep you in business. The good news is there are plenty of know-how and resources to help your organizations in this area. So please don't wait for the next disruption to justify a business continuity plan. Number three, we will have to recognize the value of codifying operational knowledge and critical information and maintaining its currency. It's quite sad for me to hear at a client site that a technical library was binned. That's the entire contents were chucked into a skip because the site had outsourced all its engineering roles and the technical library's custodian, and that role was made redundant. The cost of a major process safety event due to outdated or missing information far outweighs all the costs associated in maintaining accurate and current process safety information. Before I finish, I have 3 questions for you to think about. In context of process safety management, how well did your site perform in the last 12 months? Are your high hazard operations ready for the next global disruption? How much process safety debt is your organization carrying? I hope our observations were helpful. I can take some questions now, so please tell us your name, your organization, and please ask your question. Thank you.